Hello, it's time for another episode of Discipleship Today. My name's Pastor Bob Benson. We've been using the book of John as a discipleship text because of this special relationship that John and Jesus had together. John refers to himself quite often as the beloved disciple. We're in John 11, and I'm going to start reading in verse 45, and I'm going to go to the end of the chapter, and then we're going to go back and just make a couple comments about how this affects discipleship and how we live life with each other. I'm reading from the ESV. And remember, we're jumping into this in the middle of a story. We've just come out of the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. And it starts in verse 45. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." And one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to him, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He said this of his own accord, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but all for to gather into one children of God those who were scattered abroad. From that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, where he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying one to another, as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, they should let him know so that they might arrest him. It's interesting here. There's always two completely different reactions to Jesus and his ministry. It says there that many of the Jews therefore believed in him, but some of them went to the chief priests and the Pharisees. He never hid the things that he was doing in front of people. He was always public with his ministry. The chief priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees were quite often present as he was doing whatever it was he was doing. And these miraculous signs should have pointed them to the fact that this guy was the Messiah. They're concerned, if we let him go on like this, the Romans will come away and take both our place and our nation. They were afraid of an insurrection that would be crushed. They knew they had seen other countries rebel against Roman rule and be completely crushed. And that's prophecy. We see that in 70 AD, this very thing happens, and they come in and they burn the temple to the ground and they destroy Jerusalem because of an insurrection. But Jesus said that his ministry wasn't of this earth. He wasn't here to take over as a literal king sitting on a throne yet. But he is going to return and sit on a literal throne as the king of the world. And that's coming soon, I hope. And then this interaction with Caiaphas, who was the high priest. This prophecy that it is better for one man to die than the nation. It says that was not of his own understanding, but he had prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God. And he's talking about Israel, but he's also talking about this new nation. All the believers in Jesus Christ are a nation, and it's what we call the church today. We have been gathered together. If we are unified in the virgin birth, the perfect life, the death, the burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we are Christians, and we should be unified in that. There's one church, but there's a lot of different ways to worship. And we find that especially in the Western church today. He just did so many different things, and he lived life with these disciples. And it says that he changed his ministry a little bit here. He no longer walked openly among the Jews, it says in verse 54. But he went from there to a region near the wilderness. And there he stayed with his disciples. And this was his main goal, was to prepare these guys to take over for him. These 12 guys would go out and they would start discipling. They would start using what they learned in the 3.5 years that they followed Jesus. And that's what would change the world, this pyramid effect. As one person disciples a handful of others, and then those handful of others go out and disciple a handful each. That's what changed the world. They believed in Jesus Christ. They believed in his perfect life, his death, burial, and resurrection. And they knew it to be true. Matter of fact, we know that the majority of them died horrible deaths. You would not die for something that you didn't believe was completely true. And then this whole thing at the end with the Passover was at hand. He was a Jew of Jews. He kept all the Jewish laws, rules, and regulations. They were questioning among themselves whether he would come to the Passover or not. And obviously, it is one of the required feasts. There's 4 required feasts where every male was supposed to travel to Jerusalem. Jesus was going to go. So them to be questioning whether he was lawful as far as the laws of the Jews was just a ridiculous thing. He'd never broken any of the laws. Will he come to the feast at all or not? And that's why the chief priests and the Pharisees knew that that's when they could get their hands on Jesus. Because they knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would be coming to Jerusalem for this feast. And that's why they gave orders to seize him at their most opportune moment. We see a lot of things through the life of Jesus Christ. But one of the things that I want to focus on is I want to focus on the discipleship. Jesus spent his time with these guys. They lived life together. I know that as we live life together, sometimes we share each other's burdens, and that's a really good thing. And that's my encouragement for you today, is to continue to live life with people, showing them how it is that our faith changes how we walk on a daily basis. It's one thing to have a lot of knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Sometimes it's just good to hang out with people, love on them a little bit, and understand their burdens, understand the shape they're in and the place they are, and see if we can't help them along. And that's been my life. I've been discipled to the point where I serve as a pastor today, and that is my goal, is to help other people find out what their giftingness is, what their calling to ministry is, and then help them engage in that. So for Discipleship Today, my encouragement for you is keep discipling and keep being discipled. Thank you.